In this problem, we'll be examining two traits at the same time. We'll be using the flower position trait, axial flowers versus terminal flowers, as well as the trait of flower color, purple flowers versus white flowers. In Mendel's pea plants, axial flower position was dominant to terminal flower position, and purple flower color was dominant to white flower color. We'll use the letter A for the alleles for flower position, and the letter P for the alleles for flower color. We're going to be crossing two plants. Plant 1 is a plant that is heterozygous for axial flowers and has white flowers. Plant 2 is a plant that is homozygous dominant for both traits. When working with two traits, parents must pass on genetic information for both traits. This means they must pass on an allele for flower position, as well as an allele for flower color. So we'll need to put those two alleles together when we represent the gamete combinations that they could pass on. Plant number 1 is a plant that is heterozygous for axial flowers and has white flowers. What is the plant's genotype? What allele combinations could they form in their gametes? So determining the plant's genotype, they're heterozygous for having axial flowers. The heterozygous letters will be big A, little a. And they have white flowers. That's the recessive phenotype for flower color, so we'll make them homozygous recessive, 2 little p's. That means they have to pass on an allele for each of these traits. They could pass on either a dominant or a recessive allele for flower position, but they only can pass on a recessive allele for flower color because that's the only gene they have in their genotype. When combining an A and a P together, that makes two possible unique combinations: the dominant A with a little p or the recessive A with a little p. Plant 2 is homozygous dominant for both traits. Their genotype will be homozygous dominant for both the A's and the P's. So we're looking at all big letters for A's and P's to represent dominant alleles at each locus. What allele combination could they form in their gametes, is what that should say. They have to give a dominant allele for both traits, so they only have one gamete combination they can pass on, a dominant allele for each trait. When you make a Punnett square to show the cross, one parent had two possibilities, and the other parent had just one possibility. So we're setting up a 2x1 Punnett square here. And then when we complete the Punnett square to fill in the internal contents, we'll put the A's together to represent the genes that the offspring could have for flower position, and we put the P's together to represent the genes that the offspring could have for flower color. Our first analysis is to list the probabilities of all possible phenotypes for the offspring. So we need to recall that phenotypes is referring to the physically expressed form of the trait. In this case, it's going to be axial flowers and purple flower color. Both of the genotypes that are pictured here code for that same result. So we're going to be having 100% probability of axial purple flowers on these plants. There's two different genotypes here, but only one possible phenotype. And the question that we're answering is about phenotypes. Now you'll be moving into your independent practice.